Can you hear me?
Who am I going to witty banter with? Oh, there we go.
Oh, I don't know why my mic's going in and out. All right, we're ready. Go for it.
Cool. All right. Hello, everybody. This is so exciting. It's great to see so many faces. It's really fun. And like a hand, but pretty much faces. So that's really exciting. It is always fun to do. I'm going to switch off a gallery view. I'm like very distracted. I'm just going to stare at my own beautiful face. So it's very exciting to be able to always be able, and every time I get like a little platform to talk and teach about things that I find interesting or perhaps slightly controversial. And every time I teach anything, I've noticed I have to give this caveat. And so I'm going to give it now because I think it's really important. And it is this. Every time I go to teach a class, I tell Jennifer Rosenzweig, I want to teach about this thing. And she goes, oh, that's a great idea. It's really cute. I like it. People are like, okay, good. And I go, great, wonderful. And then I start doing my like research, and then I realized it should be more like a 3-part series or like a 5-part series. But then it's too far gone. Like we're already advertising it as a one-off, so it's going to be a one-off. So and I like teaching one-offs. So that is to be able to say that this class is a one-off. It's only one class, and we're going to cover a really big subject, as I always do. I bite off more than I can chew every single time. If you've learned with me, as many of you have, you know this is true. Yeah. So think of this as more of a gloss. This is kind of like, you know, an overview of a very big subject. And I don't do deep dives. I mean, I think I go pretty deep considering we wrap it up in like an hour. But this isn't the same as like a 3-part series. And I don't do 3-part series because I don't know, I don't plan in advance to do them. And you know, people start saying, yeah, teach a 3-part series. And like, I'll figure it out. But until you all start saying you want 3-part series, I'm going to keep doing one-offs, and they're going to be necessarily tightened in because we have an hour to cover a very big topic. So we're going to cover a lot of stuff as always, but it's pretty this time because I made it into a slideshow and not just a text sheet. I'm advancing in this COVID era, so you're all welcome. And just because, okay, it is, you know, a one-off class and it's an overview and we're going to try and do a lot in an hour, doesn't mean that we're not going to go like deep and interesting and that there isn't a specific through line. I really do have something I'm trying to communicate here, and it is this. Before we were Jews, we were something else. The Torah does not shy away from this fact. The Torah is the story of the very first Jews, and the very first Jews were not born Jews. They were converts. They were Jews by choice, so to speak. You know, and so like you can say like, oh, I'm a born Jew, and my parents are born Jews, and their parents and their parents and their parents. And that's great and that's wonderful. But at some point you're gonna go, and you're gonna stop at Avraham Avinu and Sarah Imenu, Sarah and Abraham, and they were born pagans, polytheists, and they became Jews, which is great. They were the first ones, but they became Jews. And I think it's really important to know that we come from this. This is where our whole peoplehood started. And it shouldn't be, I don't think, too huge a shock to start looking at some of these texts, these sources, even our own Torah, and start to see these little bits of paganism still woven in there and then spread throughout and kind of everywhere. It shouldn't be that big of a shock. So I'm not here to shock you, but you might end up being a little shocked, but really to show that Judaism evolved to be what it is. I remember being shocked when I was in rabbinical school, and my teacher said that everyone says that Judaism is the first monotheistic religion. And we're all like, yeah, of course, we all know that. We're going to be rabbis. And he said, yeah, okay. But really a more accurate way to think about it is that the first Jews, those early Jews, were kind of in the process of becoming monotheists. It took a little while. And that even at the very first, they might not have been purely monotheistic. They might have been more, well, we believe in God, like God, because God is the most powerful of all the gods. It was a process. And so again, it shouldn't be that shocking that you start to see these little bits and pieces of other religions, other gods, ancient Akkadians, Sumerian, whatever, woven through there, because it's not that huge a shock. So without further ado, I will now attempt to shock you. If you have questions, you're gonna have to like do the little hand raisey thing, I guess, and I will unmute you, or Jennifer will unmute you, even though I cannot see or hear her, kind of like God. So someone will unmute you. But you're going to have to do the little hand raising things. Otherwise, there's more of you than fill my screen. So I won't be able to see everyone if you're waving frantically. Capiche? Thumbs up if you capiche. Evanti? Evanti? Evanta? 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 Evanten? Oh, Anna did the actual thumb. I love that little thumbs up. 2 thumbs up from Lexi. Thank you, Lexi. Very enthusiastic. So I am going to share a screen and show you host disabled participant screen sharing. Host. Someone let me share my screen. Let me share my screen. Jennifer. Can you just let me share my screen? Is that allowed? No, hello, nothing. There we go. I swear I am a millennial who does understand how to use technology. Cool. This is the way. And present. Beautiful. So, before we were Jews, pagan threads in Judaism today, because they're still there. We're going to cover a couple different subjects, and maybe at the end of each kind of specific subject, I'll stop and look for hands being raised, kind of a thing. So, because whenever I ask people to read, no one ever wants to read. I'm just going to read it myself. This is what you get for not volunteering, people. Let's start with the terebinths of Mamre. This is in the Torah, right? Genesis. So early on in the Torah. And we see God appeared to Abraham. Yeah, I can share the slides after, obviously. God appeared to Abraham by the terebinths of Mamre, who was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Now, this is the beginning of the part where God or angels, we're not sure, or visitors. The language switches back and forth, and I always love it when that happens in the Torah. Abraham is going to learn that he and Sarah are going to have a baby. Very exciting. And what happens? Where does it happen more specifically? It happens while he's sitting by these terebinths in Mamre, a very holy moment. And this is to kind of just give you like a little teaser taster. These terebinths are they're trees. That's not, sorry, but just like skip ahead of myself. They're trees. And these trees are always where Abraham likes to hang out, specifically when very holy things are going to happen or about to happen or have happened. This specifically is the time when he learns that his progeny are going to be numerous as the stars in the sky. It's a very big deal. And he's sitting by these trees. So we should think, one would imagine, that we're very pro trees in Judaism, right? We should be like, oh yeah, trees are great. Trees are where holy things happen, right? Jews should be very pro trees. You'd think that, wouldn't you? Deuteronomy, so fast forward several books to, now the end of the Torah. And now we have a rule. You shall not set up an Asherah, any kind of pole beside the altar of God, that you may make or erect a stone pillar for such God detests. You can't set up an Asherah, and this is where I have a bit of a quibble with translations. A lot of English translations, every translation is an interpretation. They told us that in school. It's 100% true. Every translation, really, in English translation of either Torah or later Tanakh, you're going to see a lot of it. It translates the word Asherah. If you look in the Hebrew, it says Asherah, because I did the translation, and it's translated as like a prayer post or a sacred post or a sacred pillar. And that's how they translate it over and over and over. Sacred post, sacred pillar, sacred pillar, sacred pillar. But an Asherah was literally a female kind of tree goddess, well known in the ancient world, specifically the ancient world in which our Torah came to be, and later. Asherah was known to basically all of our ancestors. They were familiar with Asherah. And it's funny to me that the English translations that you read now, English obviously being a very modern, relatively, invention, they don't like to say Asherah. They like to say, it's a pillar, it's a post, it's sacred, whatever. okay, but it's literally an Asherah. And when you see other times where it comes up, it's going to be very obvious that Asherah is a big issue. But even early on in Deuteronomy, we're starting to see this, like, okay, yeah, terebinths are cool. Like, that was fine for Abraham. But for you, don't mess with the Asherah. Don't mess with Asherah, the goddess. Don't mess with anything around a tree. Don't do it. Now we see some problems. Now, I put down the places where these are found, as well as approximate years that these books were written. I think it's important just even for you to think about when these things were happening and in relation to other peoples at the time and where in history they were happening. So we see on the left in the book, this is in 1 Kings, and it's talking about Asa, who was the David's grandson. Abiyan would be his Asa's dad. So I want to say grandson. I want to say grandson. No. So not that far from Melech David. Asa, he's cleaning up. He's cleaning himself up, trying to keep his house in order. What does he do? He deposes his mother. Oh my gosh, what a jerk. His mother, Ma'akah, he deposes her from the rank of queen mother. So she's not queen mom anymore. Why? Because she made an abominable thing for Asherah, the goddess Asherah. And so what did Asa do? He cut down her horrible thing. This is King's word for it, and burnt it in the wadi. So one, who's the one who had this goddess figurine? His mother, a woman, also a royal woman. Okay. And what does he do? He cuts it down, he burns it, and he demotes his mom. So you might think, okay, well, maybe rich people, maybe royalty, maybe they had, maybe their women were all over the place, but maybe, the good Jews were just, okay, fine. Next side, God's mad. God's mad. And in Kings, we see they just being like the Jews, general Jews, have provoked God by the Asherah posts that they have made for themselves. They built for themselves shrines, pillars, and Asherah posts on every high hill and under every leafy tree. So while in Deuteronomy, it's like, okay, don't mess with this stuff, right? It said, don't set it up. It's not good. Now, fast forward quite a bit. Kings, we've got a guy who's, demoting his own mother, who is, a queen mom, because she has a little Asherah woman tree goddess figurine. And we've got God mad at everybody because they keep building these Asherah posts. They keep making these Asherah shrines. It seems like the cult of Asherah just persisted so far, which is fascinating. Well, maybe that was it though. Maybe it was like, that was then, but maybe, no. Jeremiah, if you think in Kings things were dramatic, Jeremiah takes it to a whole new level. He's a bit dramatic, to be very honest. I'm not a huge fan of reading Jeremiah in a lot of ways because he's very dire and very theatrical. So now he's just yelling at everybody because that's what Jeremiah does. He just yells at everybody. It's really what prophets do, and he specifically likes to do it a lot. On the left, Jeremiah says, "For long ago you broke your yoke, tore off your yoke bands, and said, 'I will not work.'" He's mad at the Jews because they have to take up this yoke, like Malchut Shemayim, they're going to be good Jews. Like, no, I don't want to be a good Jew anymore. Instead, on every high hill and under every verdant tree, you recline as a whore. So we get that tree imagery again. Jeremiah's always mad. The Jews aren't being Jewy enough. And I love this part. I decided to bring it in. You see the other quote from Jeremiah. The people, you have to again know the context. The people at this time are suffering from famine. They are starving. Their crops have failed. They've been suppressed. There's been violence. There's been constant unrest that the Jews have been experiencing. And they're wondering why. And Jeremiah, interestingly, actually does reflect this kind of conversation that they're having amongst themselves. And quotes the women who are saying this particular part, saying, "Ever since we stopped making offerings to the Queen of Heaven and pouring libations to her, So the Jewish women are saying this. We have lacked everything, and we have been consumed by the sword and by famine. When we make offerings to the Queen of Heaven and pour libations to her, is it without our husband's approval that we have made cakes in her likeness and poured libations to her? So there's a lot going on in this particular. There have been archaeological findings that in homes and in areas where Jews had lived for everything before this happened and after as well, that homes would have a little like nook in them, and that's where people would keep their, not like everyone's like, yeah, God, yeah, no, we believe in God for sure, God, but we also have like little household gods, not like big gods, I wouldn't like pray for everything, but like a little, this is like our personal family God, our household God. And this cult, not in like a Jonestown way, but like this cult of Asherah worship seemed to have persisted, especially among women. And so you see this conversation that Jeremiah is reflecting, that the women are like, okay, so we're supposed to stop doing it. You told us, like, don't make offerings to other gods. So you told us to stop, and we stopped. And you know what happened when we stopped? We started to starve. We started to be oppressed with violence. Everything was terrible, sword, famine. And I think personally that the second line is even more interesting. When we made these offerings to the Queen of Heaven, we poured out libations to her. We were very specifically not supposed to do that as Jews. When we did it, you think our husbands didn't approve? You think that our husbands didn't know that we made cakes to look like her? Which is just fascinating. Jeremiah uses this to say, like, you're all wrong. That's the reason why everything's so terrible, and you can't have other gods. But I just think it's fascinating. And again, I'm not trying to prove, oh gosh, we're pagans, but more that like paganism persisted. And it wasn't just an overnight magical, and now we're monotheists. It stuck around. Questions about, questions, very short comments. I'm just gonna scroll through. Do I see any hands? Oh, okay. Did it work? Daniel.
So all through the Torah, exactly as you're saying, we're doing pagan-like things, and God is telling us not to. Yes. But it's always in the context that we're stealing these pagan rituals from the people that live around us. It's almost like we're trying to blame Baal on somebody else. Did Asherah come from a different culture, or is that a Jewish invention? Or an Israelite invention, if you prefer?
Asherah existed before, during, and it is a concurrent thing and a persistent thing. We didn't invent her. I would say we didn't invent any gods. We just only have one God, and we didn't make that one up. But that's the rabbi in me, I guess.
So do we know where it came from then?
Asherah is super old. Let me check back in my notes because it's so old.
That's okay. I didn't mean to.
No, it's a good question because and also with a lot of these gods, ancient gods, they change names and they change forms. Like we're going to talk a little later about Ishtar, and Ishtar previously was known as Inanna, and they change names as different peoples and different languages kind of become dominant. I know she's Akkadian. It's Semitic, but not in the sense that it's Jewish. Like we think, oh, Semitic means Jewish. She's Semitic. Old. One of the oldest. Absolutely. But predates our existence. Good question. Let me see. On other hands, we're gonna move on to moon dances, which I have seen this one. I know, so excited about some moon dances. All right, let's go. Kiddush Levana. The Talmud, so now we're talking like essentially modern day, says, I'm gonna call on someone, Lexi, because you're listening and you're in a hotel room somewhere where it's cold and snowing and terrible, and you've got a nice speaking voice. Why don't you read for us in the English?
Okay, Rabbi
Yochanan, you got a Yochanan, just to make it hard.
Yochanan says, with regard to anyone who blesses the new month in its proper time, it is as if they greet the Shekinah, face of the divine presence.
Perfect, thank you. So we see this in the Talmud. They're having a long discussion. They go into like, what blessing should you say? Should you say this way? It's long. And then they start talking about punishments and stuff. It's kind of weird. Anyway, Kiddush Levana. Has anyone, first of all, raise your hand if you actually have seen or participated in Kiddush Levana. Has anyone seen a Kiddush Levana? I'd be so curious. Anyone? Raise a hand. Anyone? No? No? Oh, I do see a hand. Alex. All right, Alex, where are you, Alex? See if I can get you. Alex, you want to tell us about what your Kiddush Levana experience was? If you'd like. Huh? Also be private about it. It's all good. So, Kiddush Levana. We know, okay, you should greet the new month. And of course, as Jews, we celebrate the new month. How do we know we're having a new Jewish month? We're having a new moon. Okay, that's cool. That makes sense. And the Jewish month begins when the moon is new. So when we celebrate the new Jewish month, the moon is actually not full and bright and beautiful. The moon is actually, it's not gone, but we don't see it. So we have a really weird, but cool and very weird tradition called Kiddush Levana. Well, when there is a new moon, or 3 days after, or 7 days after, and some people do it like 14 days after. So there's a little bit of leeway. We do this thing called Kiddush Levana, and it's odd. There's a lot of different ways to do it. You go outside, you have to be standing up. Some people say you don't have to be standing up. I mean, if you're outside and you're praying, you probably should be standing up. You're not supposed to look at the moon because that would make it seem as if you're worshiping the moon. But you can look nearby. It's so hilarious. Anyway, we start with, on the left side, excerpt, that's what I wanted, Psalm 148. And it says, praise God from the skies, praise the one in the heights, praise the one, all angels, praise the one, all hosts, praise the one, sun and moon, praise the one, all stars of light, praise the one, skies above skies and water that is beyond the sky. They will praise God's name, for God commanded and they were created, and God set them up forever and ever, giving them a law and it will not be erased. So that's how you begin. And then you've got this bracha, you got this blessing that is kind of taken from, inspired by Sanhedrin 42a, which should seem familiar because boom, this is the section where they're talking about it. And this is the blessing. Ooh, should I torture somebody, make them read? I really don't think I sound that good. Let's see if I ever want to listen to my horrible voice. Liz Vincent, would you like to read a blessing for the moon? There you go.
All right, I'm unmuted. Hold on. I gotta move people out of the way so I can see. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, ruler of all space and time, whose word created the galaxies, whose breath created all they contain, who fixed their acts, and I guess that's supposed to be and, season.
Oh yeah, sorry.
that did not depart from their course. Joyfully and gladly they obey the will of their Creator, for there are fruitful servants performing their tasks. To the moon, Levana, God says, renew yourself, crown of beauty, for all who come from the wombs are destined to renew themselves like her, able to glorify the one who informed them by God's glorious sovereignty. Blessed be you, Adonai, who makes new the renewing moons.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You can go ahead and remute. So these are the parts that you really have, if you're going to do Kiddush Levana, which you do not really have to do, but if you wanted to do, you could do. And these are the biggest components of it. Is first, apart from Psalm 148, which is so pretty and evocative and like strongly beautiful, like praise God for this and for this and for this and for this and for this. And it's all like makes you just want to look up. And the sun and the moon and the light and the skies beyond the skies and the waters beyond the skies. Pretty. The bracha is weird. It's weird to me. I like it, but it's weird because you're praising God for being the God of space and time. So again, this is God. It's not pagan, right? We're praising God. But you're looking up at the moon and you're addressing the moon as she, which is cool. It's always nice. And you're addressing because of Levana, and you're addressing the moon also, not just that for she, but grammatical. You can say, oh, it's grammatical, but in this, the moon, you know, you're saying, oh, the moon is like, you know, people, if you come from the womb, it should be, you're like her, and you renew yourself. And this is constant, this very kind of ancient feminine language of constant renewal, which should, I mean, I would assume, it brings to mind menstruation and birth and all of it very feminine. And lots of different peoples throughout time have worshipped the moon. And Jews themselves, they didn't include it because, you know, I only want to have so many slides, like this isn't the college class, but when the moon is created, you know, it's the counterbalance to the sun, which itself is a very classic, ancient pagan way of conceiving of religion. There are two equal yet opposite gods, powers, male and female. You know, it's usually a, you know, brother, sister, lover thing, or a, you know, husband, wife thing. And we have the sun and we have the moon in Judaism. We don't worship them specifically. When you do Kiddush Levanah, which is very, I think, got those undertones in there, you're not supposed to look at the moon. Why? Because they don't want you to think you're worshiping the moon, but just because they have to say that, I think kind of underlines the fact that there's like a desire and a pull to worship God. We're worshiping God, not the moon, worshiping God for bringing us the moon, which reminds us of God. It gets all knotted up, and I like that a lot. It's really cool. If you ever, I've had the experience of being with people doing Kiddush Levanah before. It's really cool. Everyone does a little bit different. A lot of them were mystical sects like they do. Like I'm sure the Chabad have a whole thing about it. A lot of folks do Kiddush Levanah. If you have the opportunity to have that experience, I highly recommend it because it's a weird thing to be out with all these Jews. There are like paintings actually from, you know, these Polish Jews, 18 whatever, and they're like standing up outside like, that's literally what the experience is. You're outside with a bunch of Jews, usually on a Saturday night. You should totally do it. And just you're praising the moon and God. And it's also, you know, if you look at, if it's as if you greet the Shekhinah is traditionally said the face of divine presence, which is a nice way to translate it, but it's also technically the God's feminine energy, which makes sense because the sun is masculine, then the moon is feminine. Thoughts, comments about Kiddush Levanah? Again, you'll have to raise your hand because I can't see you. There's so many of you. I'm doing so good on time. I'm so proud of myself. All right, Lou. I will.
When did Kiddush Levanah come about?
So Judaism, that's always like a fun, complicated one. So you can see that obviously the roots are in the Gemara. They're in the Talmud. So that's going to be, I say 500 CE. That's when it was kind of compiled, but not, entirely. But it didn't come to its full form till a lot after. And the Kabbalists and the Hasidim and the Chabad and all these kind of more mystical folks, they added on to it. Like it's literally, I want to say like it's a page in the Lev Shalem. Like I looked it up because I was like, I wonder if it's actually in here. And it is in there. It's a page. But if you look at kind of how other folks do it, it's much longer, has been added to. Josh Furman has a comment on it. At one point in the service, of course, the art scroll has a Kiddush Levanah. Is it longer than a page is my question. I bet it is. Art scroll directs the worshiper to rise on their toes as if in dance. Yeah, and when you see these paintings of Jews doing Kiddush Levanah, it's like they're dancing. It's really cool. It's weird. It's cool. It's definitely got 3 pages. Oh, yeah, shocking. Josh says it's 3 pages in the art scroll. That's a good, like, the Lev Shalem has 1 page. The art scroll has 3 pages. Who knows how much the Chabad has, the Reform. So funny to me. They actually probably have a lot. They're much more open-minded about stuff than we are. So yeah, Kiddush Levanah. It evolved, Lou, I guess is my short answer. It's not very short. If you're going to talk about the moon, you got to talk about stars, right? So let's talk about astrology. I always checked my horoscope every morning when I was a kid because I was so amused with the idea that it was like, how could they tell me anything? Because of when I was born. Astrology. Jews don't do astrology, right? They might see it, but they don't really believe in it. What do Jews believe is a whole interesting question. We're looking at the prophets. We're looking at Jeremiah. I want to call people. I don't want them to be like mad that I'm calling on them. All right, I'm going to keep reading because I feel bad for calling people. Jeremiah. Let's do Jeremiah. Jeremiah, told you he's kind of a tough cookie. He says that God says, that's his job as a prophet, is to relay what God says. Do not learn to go the way of the non-Jewish nations, the Goyim, which just means nations, but it's taken to mean non-Jewish nations, especially in this context. And do not be dismayed by the portents in the sky. Let the non-Jewish nations be dismayed by them. Does Jeremiah say astrology, looking in the sky and trying to figure out what's going to happen next? Does he say that it's pretend? Does he say that it's fake? Does he say that it doesn't work? He doesn't say that it doesn't work. He says, don't do it. And he says, don't do it. He said, because he's like, non-Jews look up in the stars and they see things that are going to happen and they get, they get distressed by it. Don't be distressed by it. Let them worry about what's going to happen. Don't you worry. A lot of our, sure. Lou, go.
So in this statement, Shamayim is translated as sky, not heaven. And
yeah, I think it goes
most often we've seen it as heaven. Is there some significance to that?
Do you think it changes the message if it's sky or heaven? I guess. I don't know if you're allowed to unmute yourself. I'm probably not. Do you think it changes the meaning? Is one versus the other?
A little bit.
Yeah. Well, because maybe if it's heavens and it's what God is deciding what's going to happen, but it's skies. Skies are just skies and skies are whatever. I can see that. I can see that for sure. Interesting. And again, like this is, every translation is an interpretation. So this is, I look at every translation I give and I'm like, is this something I feel comfortable with or something that I need to change it because it's something incorrect? So I think you could translate it either way. I know that a lot of Jeremiah's taking the tack of like, whatever's happening, whether you can look at the stars and know, or look at the stars and not know, don't worry about it. That's something you don't have to worry about. Isaiah takes a slightly different tack. He says, he's talking to the Jews. You are helpless despite all your art. Let them stand up and help you now. The scanners of heaven, the stargazers who announce month by month whatever come upon you. See, they are become like straw. Fire consumes them. They cannot save themselves from the power of the flame. There is no coal for warming oneself, no fire to sit by. So, wow, Isaiah, way to be tough on the people. Ancient Jews, 700 BC, approximately. This is from 47 Isaiah, so it's like first Isaiah, not second. So it's just to time that for you, to date that for you, because this whole two Isaiahs thing, we're not getting into that. Point is, in ancient times, Jews were using astrology, and they were looking up and they're going, oh no, my stars are saying this, that, I'm a Cancer, he's a Taurus, it's never going to work, but I don't know if that's true, but that kind of a thing. Jeremiah is like, don't look at it, it's going to distress you. You have God, you're Jewish, it's fine. Isaiah is like, really, you're relying on astrology? Look at these people, they're like, oh, every month this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and look, they're burning up, and yet cold because there's no fire to sit by. So Isaiah takes a much stronger tack against it. Okay, so you might rightly say, well, yeah, clearly Jews shouldn't do astrology, and it was should have been beaten out of us in 600 BC, 700 BC. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. We shouldn't mess around with astrology at all, and I'm sure that got worked out of our system. You think so? This, and if you've ever done like those tours of Israel, you might have seen some of these, depending on where you went. This is from the Cohenite Synagogue in Tiberia, known as Tiberias. This is built around 300 CE. What do y'all see on those tiles? oh, it's the zodiac with Hebrew letters. With Hebrew letters, I'm sorry if it's like very small on your screen. Did the best I could. You can, and it's got like the months right now. Some of you might even like identify because it looks the same. So that's 300 CE. Now, just to remind you, when were they starting to really go back? Oh, sorry. Right. So astrology, early on, Jeremiah, Isaiah, 600, 700 BCE. Fast forward to 300 CE, and they're putting it in mosaic tiles in the floors of their synagogue. So this isn't like with Asherah worship, like, oh, the women are worshiping Asherah and a little nook in the house, and they have a little, you know, place where Asherah hangs out, and everyone does it, but no one talks about it because that's what Asherah worship was in those times. No, this is in the floor of the synagogue. Is the zodiac. Okay, Sarah, you might say, very wrong. Rabbi, you might say, being very formal here. You might say, well, that's, sure, that's like one synagogue. Really? Just that one synagogue? Luke, wait till I do my whole spiel, and I'll come back to you. There we have yet another one. The Tzipori synagogue in Sepphoris, I guess is the English, I don't know. Approximately 425, the first half of the fourth. Might be 325 actually. Point is, there are multiple synagogues in Israel with mosaics in the floor of the synagogue with the zodiac symbol. And this one, you have to look like really close. And I apologize if that's a little bit tricky because I realize that, I don't know how big your screen is in front of you. But you look at this one. Yeah, it's probably right. Sorry, probably about 325. I was wrong. No, 425. I was right. I should not doubt myself. So this mosaic floor is I think you can kind of identify around the different zodiac symbols, but it's not even just, you can say, oh, it's very, it's got lots of zodiac symbols. It's also very Jewish, but it's also got lots of other stuff. Like, let's see if I can point things out. So in the middle, you've got Helios, who is not Jewish by any stretch of the imagination, but he's on his big fiery chariot. You've got the moon in the middle there. You've got, not in this exact picture, but there are panels kind of above, and you can't see them here, but there are panels with Aaron offering the sacrifices at the tabernacle, like the one that they are building in the Torah. You have an ark. You have the three different sacrifices. The main, you've got the tamid. You've got the first fruits. So that's a Shavuot throw in right there. You've got the angels coming to Sarah and saying, "Oh, you're gonna have a baby." You've got the binding of Isaac. You've got the whole. So just everything is there. Everything. And just in case, just to test your Aramaic real quick, you might think like, well, maybe they're forced to do it. Maybe like the outside forces were like, oh, you have to do astrology. Okay, well, sorry, it's sideways. I got a little lazy and I didn't turn it. So just, tilt your head, I guess. And I also translated it. Even though it's in Aramaic, I think you could actually pick up a good amount of it. You know how in the synagogue, if you donate enough money, we'll put your name on things? And everyone's like, I know, I was laughing. And it's like hard. You're like, oh man, this is such a modern times. It's so hard. You have to like donate money. You get your name on something. Well, it makes you feel better. We've literally always been doing it because and this isn't just in this, it's in lots of other things. We see people, it's like plaques of like, thank you to this person for donating the money for this thing or this thing or this thing for this like ancient synagogue. And here, and again, even if you don't know Aramaic, I think you could actually like figure out a lot based on the words in here. Is it saying, may he be remembered for good, Yudan. You can see that really. Yudan, that second line, you can actually see it a lot. Bar being the Aramaic of Ben. Why we say bar mitzvah, not ben mitzvah, because it's Aramaic. Bar mitzvah, bar Yitzchak, Yudan bar Yitzchak, the priest, and Paragri, his daughter. Amen, amen. So thank you to the guy who donated the money for this mosaic, because now we have a beautiful mosaic. And we'll put your name on the floor for donating to our shul, something that has never changed. 425 CE, 2021, Jews are Jews. Takes money to run a shul, guys. Lou has been waiting very patiently. Okay. Comments, questions?
Yeah, so at this time period, 300, 400 CE, were synagogues houses of worship or houses of assembly?
So
maybe both, but when did worship come to synagogues? Because originally they were Beit Knesset.
Right. I mean, I think you have to decide what the word worship means. So when we think of worship, we think like prayer services, but you have this transition period when like you can't make sacrifices outside of the temple when there is a temple. You couldn't do sacrifices outside of the temple. So that by necessity meant, well, why would you have anything anywhere else? But there were times that people would gather that were not the Shlosh Regalim, when he would have to go to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices. The other sacrifice he really only could offer in Jerusalem outside of Shlosh Regalim. So yes, the answer is yes. But you have to be really kind of dynamic in how you think about, you can't think about in modern ways that we think about, oh, it's worship. Worship is not worship, is not worship, is not worship. I don't see other hands. I'm always running out of time. Oh my God. Okay. So Sukkot, and specifically the Simchat Beit HaShoeva and Hanukkah and paganism. Sarah, where are your sources? So here's the thing about these. Simchat Beit HaShoeva, or as most people who participate in it call it Simchas Beit HaShoeva, with his accent, then it comes from straight out of Poland a couple hundred years ago, or Brooklyn, whatever you want to do, is a really weird ritual. It's really weird. It's really weird. It looks like nothing else we do as Jews, nothing. It involves water, and I think they're throwing torches at some point, and at another point they were throwing etrogs at a priest. It's weird. It's weird, y'all, it's weird. And I was taught in school, this has clear pagan roots. Great. And I did research for this class. I was like, well, I should figure out what those pagan roots are so I can talk about them. I couldn't find anything good. And I don't believe in teaching if I can't find anything good and reputable to share with you. So I can't show you any proof text. I can only tell you that Simchat Beit HaShoeva is a really, really weird ritual that you could make the connection between a Jewish rain ritual that like if you do a thing then God will make it rain, not just like that our prayers say if you say the prayers then there will be rain in its proper season. We say that several times a day. It's not that. It's if you do this ritual where you pour things and there's fire and you throw things and then rain will come because God decides once a year how much rain everybody is getting, and you can affect that by the things you do. That is very pagan. Where's my direct proof? I don't have a proof text to show you, so I'm not going to show you something that I don't believe in. Hanukkah, ooh, unpopular opinion. Hanukkah, some make the argument, and I'm not going to waste a lot of space on it here, which is why I didn't, that Hanukkah comes suspiciously close to the winter solstice and is not about rah-rah paganism. Like you could say like, oh, astrology and the moon and whatever, those are like pro. Hanukkah is anti-paganism. It's how Judaism triumphed over paganism. But like, think of it this way. If you were trying to get back the Jews who might have been like, well, maybe we should be pagans now. Maybe we should be polytheists. Maybe we should just be Greek. They have a bunch of gods. It seems fine. They just tried to kill us all. Let's go over there. And you're trying to get back those Hellenized Jews because we lost a lot. I mean, assimilation's the whole thing. We lost a lot of Jews who became very Hellenized and they just kind of went out. And if you were like, we want to get them back, what better way than to say, hey, let's have this, let's just meld these things together. And Hanukkah is a triumph over paganism, but we're going to incorporate the winter solstice. Do I have exact sources for you? I don't have exact sources. There's more stuff about Hanukkah, but I didn't want to like run off on that tangent. But the point is, even things like Sukkot, specifically Simchat Beit HaShoeva, which is pagan if I ever saw anything, and Hanukkah, suspicious, popular holidays, Jewish holidays. You could make the argument about pagan roots, and I couldn't find you any decent sources, so I'm not going to share them. I think this is my last one before I get you to the weird people who our pagan, not the weird people, but things get a little bit weird after these slides. Esther Ishtar, it even sounds the same. On one side, we have Queen Esther. I mean, not the literal depiction, but the only one I could find where she wasn't white. That would make sense. And on the other side, we have the goddess Ishtar. She has many different figures. This one specifically is when she's in her Akkadian form. That was from approximately 2200, approximately BCE. Before we get into it, just because I didn't want to spend a whole slide on it, but I was also very excited. Ishtar was the primary consort or wife of Dumuzid, and also his name evolved. We talk about evolving names. His name changed to Tammuz. Yes, as in the Jewish month of Tammuz. Huh, weird. Interesting how that happened. Weird. Anyway, unrelated. Esther Ishtar. There is a theory that there's a combination happening here. There's kind of like a telling of one story through telling of another story. And we know for a fact, you ruin people's Purims. There is a strong case to be made that the story told in the book of Esther is not a history book. It's not historically accurate in the sense that it takes place at the time that it says it takes place, which even it doesn't know the time that it takes place because it changes its mind a lot, but that's another thing. If you look at the story of Queen Esther and you look at the story of the goddess Ishtar, in some ways they're very similar, and in some ways they diverge. Queen Esther is a story about a king who's looking for a queen, and she finds him essentially by going into his harem and is the best of all the ladies, and so becomes Queen Ishtar. She's already got a guy, her man Tammuz, but he gets taken away to the underworld, and so Ishtar goes also on a search for her husband. She goes to the underworld to find him. Back to Queen Esther. Esther, as we know, she was kind of hiding herself. She didn't say, she didn't go in there and be like, hey, I'm a Jew, because that was like a dumb idea at the time. And Mordecai told her, no, don't tell people you're here. She was very, very covered up. She was very sheathed and covered. On the other side, we've got Ishtar. Ishtar goes down to the underworld. Every gate she goes through to the underworld, she has to take off something she's wearing. And finally, when it gets to the queen of the underworld, she is completely naked. In this way, the stories are very much diverge, almost like as an opposite, like completely opposite. Back in the story of Purim and Queen Esther, not Ishtar, but Esther, Esther says, all the people of the king's land know if any person enters the king's presence without having been summoned, there is but one punishment for them. They will be put to death, and I have not been summoned for the last 30 days. And Mordecai's like, you got to say something, Esther, like he's going to kill us all. You got to say something. And she's like, but if I do, he'll kill you. Everyone knows they kill you if you go and talk to the king without permission. And I have not gotten any kind of permission. On the other side, we have Ishtar, where the queen has trapped Ishtar in the underworld. And while she's under there, human world fertility declines and people are dying, and it's bad. Also keep in mind that the Jews were, once Esther did decide to take action, they were fasting. So interesting thought. Queen Esther, back in Esther, the thing that clinches it, the thing that ends all, Mordecai says to Esther, don't imagine that you, of all the Jews, are going to escape with your life. We know this from the story. You know, if you keep silent during a crisis, you know, no one's going to it's going to be over. Someone else will end up getting this anyway. If you don't save us, maybe someone else will save us. And even if you, like, you're not going to be safe. You're still a Jew. So Mordecai, her cousin, uncle, it's never really clear, says his little speech to her, and she gets roused to action. Ishtar also has to go to help from a man, specifically the king of the gods. He goes down to the underworld and gets Ishtar and brings her back up. And so I think there's a somewhat famous historic, ancient scholar who studied very in depth the stories and the history of the goddess Ishtar and Queen Esther, and makes the argument that there are very clear similarities, not just in their names, but in their journeys And I just think it's another interesting way that the story, like a very Jewish story, it's a Jewish story, it's literally in our canon, combines with a literal pagan goddess. Also, because her husband's name is Tammuz, and that's a Jewish month, which is ridiculous. Thoughts about, comments about Ishtar, Esther, or are we gonna move on to modern day pagans? Pagan rabbis. Not even kidding. I'm serious. And Easter Esther, is that what we're talking about? Seeing the messages coming in. Yes. Yeah. Guess you can make a comment. There's some more of that. Jewish neo-paganism. For example, the Cohenite Movement, which is a movement of women who ordain Kohenot instead of Kohanim, Kohenot, women, Jewish women priestesses. It's a modern movement, and it's I know a couple, and they're kind of like bringing paganism back, but also in the sense that from their point of view, it never left. Jewitchery, like witchery, and Jewitchery. There is a whole group of folks who really just love and embrace paganism through a Jewish lens, or Judaism through a pagan lens, which is super interesting. And I brought you two quotes from two different rabbis who really just align very strongly with the Jewish neo-pagan movement. This is modern people, by the way. This is modern folks. We've got Rabbi Jill Hammer, who says, paganism is a human impulse. Whether you're monotheistic or polytheistic, people experience divinity through their experience. And I'm going to say his quote, and then I'll say my bit, and then I'll wrap. Rabbi Ohad Ezrahi, who works out of Israel, says, paganism is fundamentally about relationships with trees, fire, earth, air, spirits, and other people. It's about not seeing the world as an object, but seeing it as alive. So there are modern day Jewish pagans, Jewish neo-pagans, because it is, kind of modern, who, if you read through their stuff, mostly don't see what they're doing as being a completely new invention. They see themselves as taking, it's like for them, like for a lot of movements, the next logical step in Judaism. They say, look, we're just taking things that already exist in Judaism, and we're just leaning really hard into them. And both these rabbis make the point that this is something that's missing from modern Judaism, is like an embrace of the worship of the natural world. What they would both also say is that, and Rabbi Ezrahi says this, I think, really beautifully, actually. He says that he's like, ultimately, you're not, he's like, I'm not praying to a tree or to fire, to earth, to air. He's like, it is all God, and it's just different forms and different ways of experiencing God. I'm experiencing God with trees, I'm experiencing God with fire, with earth, with air, with spirits, with people. And in that moment, in that time, I'm giving it this name and this label, but ultimately it is all God, the one God. And if you're experiencing God in those ways, doesn't lead you to be a better person, to do good things, to do mitzvot, essentially doesn't say mitzvot, but I think that's what he means, then you're doing it wrong anyway. But if you're doing it without it, and you're still not doing good in the world and being a better person, then you're doing that wrong too. And it's like, both of their theories, and a lot of Jewish neo-paganism today, is that we just need more positive action in the world. Cool, great. So I'm going to wrap up with this. And I'm going to take my screen share off. Cool. Well, I can see everyone's faces again. How lovely. I'm going to wrap up by saying this, that I think that it is a natural human impulse to be pulled towards paganism. I think that's just how human beings are kind of wired. And I think to look at it into the sky and at the earth and to feel connected to it in a deeply spiritual way, I think that is what human beings are built for. I think that's why you see this kind of movement today towards, if not neo-paganism, towards, at least in millennials and Gen Z, towards astrology. People I know and love and who are completely rational human beings are like, what's your sign? Why? And they're like, oh, because it means this, that, and the other thing. I'm like, but why? Crystals. Like, you think like, oh, but these are people who think religion is the dumbest thing they've ever heard of, but they're really into crystals, and they're really, because I think there's just like a natural human like pull towards paganism. And I think that's why you see so much of it still undercurrents woven through and into Judaism, because this is where we come from. And it's not a bad thing as a Jew if it brings you to God, not if it takes you away from God, but if it brings you closer to God. I think that's also why monotheism is such a rebellion. It's such a revolution, because was the early ways. Like, this is what Judaism did. We said, yeah, we're not going to do that stuff. We're not going to bifurcate or however, multiple ways of thinking about God. There's one way to think about God, and that's what we're going to do. And that's been like the struggle of thousands and thousands of years, is by just saying like, yeah, but we could have to redirect everything back to God. Everything gets redirected back to God, everything back to God. And I think that's what makes it a beautiful struggle, and why don't be worried or scared of or nervous about the pagan little bits and pieces that are still in our tradition. I think that's normal, as long as you stay directed towards God. Ultimately, I think it'll be fine. So I'm happy that I do my time. Boom, 8 o'clock, Jennifer, the new record. So feel free to leave. Obviously, I do try to be respectful of the time. I do know Karen Tamber Rose now. I did her brief bot a couple weeks ago. Not hers, her daughter's. Happy to take questions. Happy if you just want to go bye-bye because it's 8 p.m. I'm not performing any more tricks though, so you're on your own.
Can I say, can I ask you to comment on something?
Yes. I was trying to figure out how to unmute you, so you beat me to it.
Yes, I've always been interested in the Inanna Ishtar story as an allegory. And I actually wrote an exam on it once and compared it to the Christian myth of the resurrection. Because Inanna goes down into the underworld and all these layers, and she's disrobed. She's hung on a hook to die for 3 days, and then she's resurrected.
I read it through for like the Esther stuff, and I was not thinking about the Jesus stuff. But that's super interesting. That would actually be interesting because it draws in kind of, I don't know if Ron Moses is still on the call, but it draws in what he was saying about Easter.
Well, yeah, it's resurrection, but it's also, I thought about how Inanna, in becoming herself, is disrobed. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of an allegory for what we have to do. If you think about clothes as the persona that we hide ourselves behind. Mm-hmm. So I guess I was wondering if you could comment on, is there a sense in the story of Esther that's also part of the story, that it's allegorical for us becoming individuated, becoming ourselves through showing ourselves in our true nature?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not that I don't have a thought on this. I'm remembering something else that I read, and I'm like trying to remember 2 things at once, and it's very dumb. Yeah, I think it's clearly because when Esther has character development, like she develops as a person through the story. She starts off, she's essentially given out like, oh, you're pretty, go be a wife for this guy you don't know who's not Jewish. We're gonna give you away. And she goes and she's hiding herself while she's there, and they're busy trying to just pretty up her outsides. And then as she becomes queen, and you had to start, I think you do see that kind of arc. You do see that kind of switch over where then she's like, okay, I'm queen. Now she's like, and she tells Mordecai, like, tell everyone to fast. Me and my lady to fast, and tell everybody to fast for 3 days. And then she finally like essentially disrobes. Also, like the story starts with Vashti, who refuses to take her clothes off. And it gets, booted or killed, whatever way you want to look at that.
But it has a Jewish flavor in that her individuation process is not just about her. One of the things about Judaism is that it's very community minded.
For sure.
She not only comes into her own, it's part of it's important for the whole community. And in this case, it's about survival.
Yeah.
For her and the community.
Yeah. yeah, it's like a grudge. It's definitely more than her individual experience, but also her individual experience.
Yeah.
Ah, it's really interesting. I'm gonna think about that more. That's cool. Thank you. That's really cool. Anyone else? People like hearing everyone else's questions. Usually people ask good questions. I mean, people always ask good questions. See if anyone texted me good questions. Again, you'll have to raise your hand to be unmuted, I think. I think that's the rule. I know this link got out to like a lot of places, so we just need to like keep it safe for us all. I think Lou, you're unmuted now.
Yeah.
Lily, you'll be next.
Is Ishtar connected cross-culturally to Isis in the Egyptian culture? There's some similarity in the names, Ishtar and Isis.
I'm, despite all appearances, I'm not an expert. I feel like my guts to say no, but I have to look. I could look and get back to you. It's a good question. It's an interesting question. My gut feeling is not. And Jennifer, just before when we go off, just save chat just so I can get like the questions that are coming in that I'm not paying attention to right now. But I want to get back to people who ask me questions. Lily, did you have a question, comment? I saw you had something. Yeah? Good. Thank you to everybody. Thanks to people who are here and waving. All right, Lily, what you got for me? Or just
no, I was just going to say that when you were talking about the two rabbis who are interested in the pagan roots and wanting to promote that, I find that rather disturbing. Mm-hmm. I feel like it just takes away a lot from our belief in one God. And I mean, you can appreciate, I feel a person can appreciate all the things that are in the world, in the universe, but it's just like somewhat disturbing to me. Mm-hmm. Just my thoughts.
No, I'm glad you said it, because I think that's in focusing on what I was trying to show, which is like all the ways that paganism really is in many ways still informing at least our tradition, is I swung away from all the stuff in our ancient tradition. I mean, the medievals have all sorts of feelings, and none of them are positive, about just getting away from paganism, saying like, we are not that, we are different from that. And because we're so uncomfortable with it. And I always kind of think that it's partly because that's where we come from. Like that's it. I mean, it is, like Abraham didn't grow up a Jew, and Sarah did not grow up a Jew. And I wonder if it's like that discomfort. It's like, oh no, that's too close. That's too close. Even though for us, it's like thousands of years that we haven't been practicing pagans. And I'm not saying you have to go out and be a pagan, now I'm not saying you have to go and be a pagan. Lily Hurwitz, it's time to be a pagan.
Got to buy some idols.
Yeah, just get a couple, get a little Asherah. It's more that I don't see any point, because maybe because my background, I mean, not my recent background is there's this kind of like, we have nothing to do with that. We evolved past that. And it's like, well, not really though, because there's still a lot of that in there. And I just don't see the point in like denying that. But I'm not saying you have to go out and like, worship a tree now because, Abraham sat under a tree. It's just that like, there's nothing wrong with appreciating a tree. I would probably draw the line worshiping the tree, but saying like, wow, like this is why we have brachot for like beautiful scenes. This is why we have brachot for eating delicious foods. There's a brachot for seeing a particularly beautiful person. Like we Jewified everything. You see beautiful things in nature and experience the natural world. And our impulse should be like, wow, thank God.
Yeah.
And the Jewish neo-pagans are such an interesting thing. I think that it's a lot of folks from the people I've read that are not, who feel they have no place in kind of any kind of mainstream Judaism. And this is how they engage Jewishly. And like, well, least they're engaging.
Yeah, but isn't it kind of similar to, well, maybe not similar, but sort of like Jews for Jesus?
Ooh, I want to say it's Rabbi Jill Hammer. Someone asked her that. They're like, aren't you basically just like Messianic Jews? Like, they are like, we're Jewish, but we believe in Jesus. And you guys are like, we're Jewish, but we're pagans. Someone asked her that. And I think it was her. Someone asked one of them. I could find the exact source for you. I could look it up. And the response, because I don't remember which rabbi it was now, was, look, we're not saying let's fundamentally change the tenets of Judaism. Belief in Jesus fundamentally changes the tenets of Judaism. If you're going around saying like, yeah, we already have the Messiah and he was this guy and then he died, whatever. Like, those things are not reconcilable as a Jew. And what this particular brand of Jewish neo-paganism is that we're going to just lean really hard into all those little threads and undercurrents that are like existing in Judaism underground. And we're going to just pull those out and like focus on them. And is it weird? 100% it's weird. And is it new to pull them that far out and focus on them that much? Is definitely a new thing. Their response was, well, we're not saying let's take two things that don't work together. We're not worshiping the moon. Fundamentally, we're not worshiping the moon or a tree. We're worshiping God in this way or in that way or in that way. And I'm not saying I would do it or you would do it, but I'm saying some people would do it and they would not see themselves as being like Messianic Jews. Though I can see why you think it, for sure. I see Susan Clemens. Look people up. It's so much easier in a classroom. I'm never taking a classroom for granted again. Okay. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Perfect.
This is awesome. I just got notified about this from a friend on Facebook and I've loved it. I want to respond to Lily. I think it's almost that the little bit I've read of Jill Hammer, it's almost that she's more pantheistic than pagan. So it isn't that Yahweh Adonai is not the only God. It's that Yahweh Adonai is reflected more physically in everything than most Jews typically think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, for me, and this is a whole other one-off class, but like pantheism versus panentheism of, saying that like there is like everything, because one way of saying like everything is within God, another is saying everything is of God. Everything is of God. And that's even also like process theology, like Brad Artson, and that like everything has divinity within it, which I would say is not exactly the same thing as saying everything is within God. It's like saying everything has a little bit of God inside of it. And it's just kind of like recognizing, to pull back to like what you were saying, is that just recognizing in like a really big gadol, in a really big sense, recognizing, honoring, celebrating the divinity within all things, and specifically probably a tree, the moon, rain, animals, whatever.
Right.
Interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Lou, I'm sorry, you were waiting very patiently. We're 12 minutes passing into my defense. It was not my fault. I didn't do it. I finished teaching at 8. Nobody gave that.
You did. Kudos.
Thank you.
So I'm not a scholar of Hebrew language. And I don't have a chumash in front of me, but what I have learned or been taught in the 10 Commandments is that thou shalt have no other gods before me, possibly referring to other gods, possibly meaning there are no other gods. But there could be other gods. They're just not in front of me. Okay. So what's your take on that?
It reminds me of, I'm glad you brought that up. My teachers in school saying that we look back at the Torah, which whether you think God literally dictated or whether you think that ancient people wrote it and it's been worked on, it doesn't matter really. Like, we're looking back on it through our eyes and we're saying, oh, it says don't have any other gods before me. It means that God is the only God and there are no other ones, which fine. That is, you can say that's true for 2021. in ancient times, that was a radically huge statement to say, what do you mean there's no other gods? And my teachers taught, like, okay, maybe that's the way it is meant to be taken, but maybe the way it's meant to be taken is that, yeah, there's lots of gods. We all know there's lots of gods. The Torah literally talks about other people and their gods. And our God is just, perhaps this is what it means, and perhaps this is what it meant to ancient peoples. Our God's just the biggest, baddest God on the block. The most powerful. Our God wins every time. And that was what was so revolutionary. I mean, I think you also say that that's the evolution of monotheism, that it started out as this one thing and it became this thing today. Maybe this is its most evolved form, or maybe we're going to evolve even further. Who knows? You know, I'll probably be dead then, so it doesn't even matter. Any last thoughts from anybody? Lou, one more thing. I think you can unmute.
Yeah, perhaps. And I don't mean to dominate all the questions, but when I retired, before I retired, I laid back and let everybody else talk. And now that I'm retired, I think I have as much voice as anybody else. So,
good for you.
But the Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. How does that reconcile with thou shalt have no other gods before me?
Oh, Lou, we could have a whole one-off class about the Shema. The Shema the Shema suffers from being translated into English because it's so much bigger when you just look at it in terms of Hebrew. And we're 15 minutes over, and I don't want to go like too far down that rabbit hole. I did see another hand come up, but Shema Yisrael, hear Israel, people of Israel. Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai is our God. Adonai Echad, God one. What does that mean? It doesn't exactly explain itself. God, like there's only one God, or God's oneness, like all things are one with God. All things are part of God, which is the only one, because God is the thing which we are all within. That's very pantheist. A whole class about the Shema. Square that circle. You get a big question at the end of a class. Shame on you. And I have to have a whole other class. Hope you're happy. Now I know, no, next month we already know what we're doing, but the month after next, maybe we'll do a class on the Shema. Serious Shema, yeah. Melina, you can unmute.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you, Rabbi. I was wondering if you could comment on Tu B'Shvat, since it is around the corner. I know that's probably also a big topic, but maybe you could give some summary sort of observations or wisdom going into the holiday, given the topic.
Oh, there's so many directions to go because it's so minor a holiday. You can put whatever you want on top of it. It's such a boring thing in our text, and it's so sad. They're like, yeah, okay, you got, everything. There's 4 New Years in Judaism. 4? That's crazy. Well, we like to who doesn't like New Year's? New Year's is fun. It's champagne. So there's 4 of them in Judaism, and everyone's like, oh, like Tu B'Shvat's the New Year of the trees, but it literally is the New Year of the trees. And the text doesn't. Our legal text does not really care about Tu B'Shvat particularly. It's just not interesting to them. To our rabbis. I'm going to unmute you. So another question. Comment, questions, or more?
Well, I was curious, given the biblical references to trees and I forget the term in Hebrew for it, but Asherah.
Yeah, the Asherah, or Asherim in the plural. Asherah is female tree goddesses. They've literally found they're like a woman and a tree combined into an idol. So it's pretty obvious what an Asherah is. I think this is another example of how people just really want to either worship trees or worship God via our admiration of trees, because so much has kind of sprung up around Tu B'Shvat, and the Tu B'Shvat Seder is a great example of that. And that's the Kabbalists that really kind of took that and ran with it. And even then, it's like some Kabbalists, people I know who deeply live Kabbalah are like, ugh, Tu B'Shvat Seder, don't even ask me. It's ridiculous. It's not a real thing. And I'm like, okay, gosh, sorry. Even my teachers in yeshiva. But then, there's lots of people who do Tu B'Shvat Seders. And I think it's a very recent thing that has become so huge. And it's the 4 season, and that's a whole other thing, like the four-part thing, the 4-part of divinity, the 4 seasons. That's like in paganism, it's a big thing. The Kabbalists, the 4 parts of your, like yourself and your soul. The Kabbalists latched onto it. There's a lot of pagan themes running around there too. Yeah. Those two tend to cross paths a lot, and it all kind of comes together in Tu B'Shvat because you have the seasons, kind of divides very nicely.
Right.
And so Tu B'Shvat's a great time to explore a lot of the tree themes that are, even though we're told like, don't make an Asherah, this guy burnt down his mother's Asherah and demoted her. Okay, but that being said, there's a lot of tree stuff in Judaism. We love trees. And for people who aren't supposed to worship them, we're supposed to like care for them. And the Torah says, don't chop them down because they can't run away. And we're clearly supposed to love trees.
Right.
So,
Thank you.
Great time to worship. Not a great time to worship trees. Great time to appreciate trees coming up. Good question.
Thanks.
I think I'm going to. I know there's a lot of comments that were in the chat box. So I'm going to get back to those later. So thank you for your comments and your questions, and I'll get back to you. That's why we have people registered. Now I got your email. I can find you if I don't know you. And thank you for spending this time with me and letting me. Once a month, I get to be a real Jewish nerd for an hour and 20 minutes, and it's really fun for me too. So thank you for joining. See you next time. Thanks for coming. So much fun. It's gonna be big Jew nerd for an hour and 20 minutes. It's fun. Now I'm excited for next month. Ooh. Oh, this one's me actually. Leave meeting. There we go.
Did you say you already picked your topic for next month?
I thought we talked about me doing Jewish disability awareness.
Oh, okay, cool. I remembered.
Awareness, appreciation, and inclusion.
Then I couldn't remember if we actually talked about it or if I just thought it.
I think it'd be really nice, and I think it'd be like a way more in-depth way to do it. That's not a sermon. Because I could actually like teach. I actually have a whole thing I forgot that I did before the pandemic hit. I was supposed to teach on it at St. Thomas University of St. Thomas, whatever. So I probably just like use those sources because I was like, I found some cool stuff, and
have like a so I can include it in, not like a whole write-up or anything, but just like a title, or you don't have to, I won't hold you to it, but just for like an overview sort of graphic.
Yeah, I do it like a long, like a sentence, like a run-on sentence.
No, like a title. That's all.
Like a title.
Just like just a title.
Yeah, I can think of something pithy. There we go. Alone at last. Oh, your microphone is like driving me crazy.
I know, it's really annoying.
Maybe it's like my mic. Is my mic? No.
No, it's mine because I never use this computer mic, and for a reason. Right. But apparently AirPods do not work. They work on my computer, but they don't work on Zoom. Why? I don't know.
Hold on, pause. Why don't you go investigate? It sounds like somebody's throwing up and I don't know who.
Oh. Child or dog?
We'll talk. Or husband. Either way. Gotta go.